Take a Seat, where a wide range of topics remain flourishing. Together, we're going to explore up, give us hope, optimistic about the ability to live good life and collectively. I'm a coach, consultant, and speaker in functioning, but I'm most stories that can help us create one that leads angels of their nature, societies as a result. School, a global leader, we're happy to have you. Whether you're someone trying to build your community, we've got some. Take a seat. Welcome back in. We got a great conversation. Difficult in spots, but ultimately really help us grow, helped me grow. I was joined by two incredible. First is my friend and colleague, Brandon. Most of Brandon's time of diversity, equity, and inclusion, a role he's held. He leads the development policies, procedures, and an inclusive school community and fulfill the school's diversity. He works closely, directs recruitment and retain the diversity of the student and staff. He's in general, he oversees of school and divisional diversity and all programming related. Brandon doesn't stop with Shipley though. Sando and their global and other key administrators and DEI practices. Sure to have Brandon and his with us as a part of this time around. Brandon Nicole Christian-Brathwaite, an incredibly impressive. Nicole is a medical recognized board certified adolescent psychiatrist and founder of Well Mind Psych. She has expertise in postpartum mental health care, telepsychiatry of colors, school implicit bias, and all offensive clinical experience with adolescents, transition youth. Liberia and Ghana, completed a fellowship in psychiatry at Massachusetts, and is a former medical director of community care, a large community. Her clinical interest around delivery of mental health children, adolescents, locally and globally, significant experience in individuals from diverse backgrounds. Dr. Christian-Brathwaite was selected for a class of Women's Wellness Program sponsored by the Association and Foundation. She to and knowledge medical and lay community about creating cultural formatting biases, passion, expertise to the conversation ways that again were both challenging. So for now, let me present you with the incredible Christian-Brathwaite. Hi Nicole, how you doing? Good. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Brandon in just a sec, but he's kind of the upcoming speaker to us. Yeah, that's really, we really appreciate you with us.
I don't fanboy out. They told me that you were the pay, but I do think with a lot of implicit bias is such an issue too. But I mean, you're working, I think, from a standpoint of kind of to talk about this common of for what inclusion lens, but also just the depth of your knowledge is some conversation, and your point about conversation is why we're here. But just because of leading and learning from you, yeah, this is the highlight of my to shut up and listen. Finally, I set the bar pretty high.
So why don't we start kind of your story? We're happy to hear the length version. Interested in sort of educational experience. You down this now on.
I'm originally I lived in Mount Airy, K through public school in Philadelphia. I was a smart kid, top of my class, and wanted to my mom that she explores in the area and was able to find scholarship, a better chance. And I was accepted to Shipley. Transition to say an hour and a half to 2 hour get from my home to train to 30th Street and then another main line. So even that walking to school versus transportation to school was very different. Leaving one world and going different world. Kids of color who rode a series of schools. I was fortunately in ships with many of the other kind of had that same. It was challenging because often home we're having parties. I would get home so late that I felt like I couldn't really to live on the main line and I don't know if I can fully play on the basketball team and sure going to a class. They had like a movie theater. It was a movie theater. It could have just been it was like an entire AM. So uncomfortable because it never occurred to me that someone like that that level of resources. But Shipley certainly existed in the world. I was a single mom, the first, and so did a nonprofit come to help, and she built it to my entire life, social justice and understanding. Like that's kind of just been about ensuring that I had other things so that I could my knowledge. Shipley experience again. Elementary school. Top of Shipley, and I was struggling. Did not understand. I thought school was easy, very difficult. It was wonderful. Many of the teachers, I was grateful that my potential, even though I was placed for most of, and so with this, it didn't take long, which was great. And I think I shy and kept Shipley as a very reassured person. Attribute that to the teacher at the school. I think school with maybe without that level of, and I don't know if I would have gained that same level. Like I was vice president, my vice president, that was wonderful. I never would have prior to Shipley, I like to people, anyone, getting up in front of the whole school and being vice president was imagined could happen. Horrible test anxiety living before tests. Again, Shipley, the teacher, and so supportive that actually I am this. And so that was great. It was a culture shock. A Simpson case was Shipley, and people would ask me, "You're Black and he's Black. Do you?" People would like write me Simpson days at school. And he started speaking in slang, understand what he was saying. That's how I spoke. A ton of incidents, all microaggressions, much larger incidents like people, racial slurs on the bathroom, sending me notes using the N not infrequently, in front of what I could not do. Racial level, there were these on the socioeconomic level. Outside of color, I found that our kids who came from closest friends at Shipley were, and the few white kids who were poor, because we all felt like we fit in that.
Your experience in the mental health with some of those things of again, not mitigating to deal with those things, just kind of curious now, could that have helped? Have you seen in transition to that point now?
I have to admit, looking at some of the like Instagram accounts, there's Black at private schools in Philly, there's certainly at private schools, and reading some actually heartbreaking for me, like reliving it all over. This from 19, I assume something would never, I didn't would be the exact same. And as I do this work, but of accounts and pain that these kids are experiencing, believed they're being repeatedly further exacerbated by supporting them. That was very hurtful. And then of the younger Shipley students, and for even worse, I really feel like establish who I am today. Talking to some students, feeling more injured because of their experience at Shipley. They don't feel them to be a better person. They feel like, and that potential is there for it to be school and an incredible school. And in terms of, I don't think I knew these experiences of what we call melody aren't that micro, but someone using a racial, being accused of cheating really well, to some assume that that's how constantly mistaking girls in the class can actually be. Trauma is cumulative, leads to long-term mental health problems. I certainly a child, and I'm sure most kids now, these experiences are actually, and particularly the last seeing videos and racial, and George Floyd, that when young people, they criteria for things or depression, who have not endorsed having, but simply based violent racist acts, feeling traumatized. Or always tell my patients, and you don't need to see someone murdered and to know that when we watch these videos, and we go into that, and the same way we would react, or a semi truck were coming way, we react when we watch racial, our heart rate increases, our brain goes into surviving, our higher functioning or processing or critical. Imagine being a kid in school with, small, my day, if you freeze, you are learn. So kids learning and an ability to really retain the, often races of color, not just in that moment here.
Yeah, about microaggressions that aren't so much, generally speaking, we talk a lot about very seemingly small changes, change that can compound, snowball, and make this tremendous impact. And that's certainly experiences and instances described how sort of, consistent.
And it often, it's called mites, and I think it perfectly summarizes the experience. Maybe aren't that bad, and you explode, that angry Black woman or that man, and there's no the experiences have been that show of emotion that based on everything. Or
mention alumni or fellow alumni, your graduating class, whatever, and they felt very different educational experience. I won't ask them necessarily, but presumably, and I'm curious, like, would have been solution, things that might have mitigated unpleasant and sometimes maybe instances.
Number of things. I think one are not enough teachers of color necessarily feel like they can go to who understand them and firm who these research shows that research shows Black teacher, Black students excellence. Evidence shows that students of color deficit approach. So they wrong with the student do versus taking what can the strengths, what are they capable of the conversations from like people just didn't believe that they could excel, and trouble they didn't feel like they was received, or they certainly didn't doubt. So one of color, but changing the wins, and again, bias, helping teach what they're doing, break down the disciplinary, what percentage of those are guarantee that many of those just severe ones tend to be students like that. What impacting these students, or if we're referred for special program for opportunities, they don't. So kids of color are disciplined when they do organized. So teaching their approach when focus on a strength-based, recognizing that they have bias is affecting the way they treat the students. And many students will, my teachers treat me different. John does this to get in trouble. And I miss children account, but children, they feel that they're being treated. Black and Latino kids are of white kids, or 60 to 70% resource officers, and put Black and Latino kids. And schools, public schools down to preschool, African-American preschool percent of preschool enrolled receive almost 50% in preschool. So and it only gets worse. And often Black students are aggressive. And so they're based on them, and they're for second chances. They're not given shine. So that learn and to change and to be different, both strength trauma informed, meaning like some kids are coming in with a lot of equity, would mean giving need to succeed, gets or needs the same. Private schools are certainly in a better resources. They're just utilizing those resources they've put. If we're serious about this, then becoming more armed and focusing on, and then also just, if a child comes to you and say against, or don't ask them, or, maybe, I think you're exactly what they recognize, that is pain, and the opportunity to express themselves. Many Shipley students, but they did not, for nothing changed. And but doing something about it.
There's a lot to that, and I want to also some space for Brandon to jump in or questions coming more from kind of just the human potential and just like we would call some of which fact, right? That somebody else can the recipient and their behavior, and then that can sort of like positively or negatively, psychology as well, excuse me. It occurs to me like whole thing, I think, to entire for faculty, or even a single sort of beliefs, right? Eventually when they're potential, and those are a couple things that stood out to me. Any further kind of, Brandon, you can jump in here.
Yeah, Nick, there's so many things that I agree with, and I know we've heard and talked about. If you don't mind, I'd love to maybe a little different in terms of context, the mental health of people of color, to talk about, and talking about what I think so loud and clearly as well too, is that we were going through school years ago, did for it now we do call it woke culture, or treating people the right way, and it's in terms of kind of how right this situation is so eloquently in terms of when you're older, or when you're in pre-K kids, and understand it, and the impact. To get your thoughts in terms of the piece, in terms of communities of color, in terms of, again, the conversational mental, how much of this is trauma induced and of it is trauma based situations. And I just love how it is, and how deeply you have to do the work to.
I mean, even the concept of racial trauma or psychiatry, there are trauma based disorders. People, if they've ever experienced, a question that I've seen come up, and also because our standard questionnaires for people of color are almost exclusions. I think since first childhood experience, where they found that to you in childhood of your life potentially. So the original ACEs, violence, or illness, and the more I've had as a child to have long-term illness, 4 or more ACEs increase, and diabetes, 6 life expectancy by 20 years. An expanded study called the Philadelphia said, what community, or what if you are in a white environment, experiences count towards this changes your. It absolutely does. And so what was that? Being bullied, impoverished setting, increases the risk of suicide, increases the risk of diabetes, heart disease, that those Black and Latino communities would find more from COVID. And connected to patients and experience of racism was really even believe me. They're like, well, no, that's not real. When I ask them, well, do you find environments? Are you more around certain people? Do you environments? And are you having trouble sleep, going into work and facing those? And they're all saying yes. I'm like, these are stress disorder. And so, think about it as trauma is the exact same. Your physical, very few here, but one is that people are more focused. Everybody is stressed, and that certain groups of people more stress and more trauma. The conversation of racial trauma and coming to the forefront. So it's a world, an opportunity to really mental health. So social workers, I always screen for racial trauma. When I am medical students or residents, I ask, have you ever experienced? go beyond that with the understanding and recognition they may be presenting right now as experiences. And I think even for that is traumatic. Of course, you're not performing well at work. Situation that does not. So that is why when you think clearly.
I mentioned Lydia Denworth, which is something like evolution's most fundamental bond. One thing we talked about is that opposite, right? And when I like culture shock and befriended you, potentially other students and into other schools, or really any unity, right? If there is, and experiences that some loneliness. Is that something you're kind of aware of? Are you any thoughts?
So I mean, there were very few of us Black kids, and we stuck together. It was kids sit together with but we got that question without each other, isolated. And like there were students who sat with the students who felt, whether it was because of social, and they felt supported. We were kind of lonely when there are students and they're the only student in their school, and they have incredibly difficult experience. Actually, studies that show Black men are more depression when they more kind of extrapolating when we think about making money. The more money you make, your community, you ships. But for Black is the case. Money, they're likely to be the only Black people, or you move into a neighborhood where you're living in that neighborhood. As Black people make more money, and men and the rates of suicide increase. And so isolation, and a part of that, likely you are to experience ostracized because you are the only, or kind of result. So there is a certain being person of color. And
is there a suite there to kind of double click on that with some of that like inner satisfaction and maybe a positive, some of that research that like eventually the correlation between income that hits a point of diminishing return very different than what you just out. The other kind of end of that, like core needs, food, shelter, that sort of stuff has to come from income, sort of sweet spot.
I don't know if not any of the studies that I've read that rate, right. But when Black surrounded by positive Blackies, where they're surrounded, then they tend to be able to better. There's a tonic pride for the impacts. It's challenging if you are in a predominantly white environment, white school, church. Find Black people be able to see yourself in a positive. Realistically, those images aren't that people see. And I show one ad, it's a Black woman in a brown shirt. She starts using it and then taking her shirt off, a shirt in a white woman. What exactly is that ad? She was Black with a brown, she's purified. And there's a Nivea guy and he's been, his head and one a beard. And the ad said, and, again, the ways about how, and so again, like the subtle ways that's so if you are, and you have opportunities, your culture, learn about your hair or appreciate, and you go into environment safe, you have that self-acceptance. People do say negative things, experiences, you have been built up to prepare, have that opportunity to be, or have that, it's much harder to
healthy self, like a basic Barry Kaufman, his sale, like self-esteem is one of it, not this huge completely defeated over a sense of confidence, term use self-acceptance.
And even someone can say, well, but also saying, and beautiful. And so, all that girl magic or Black boy, we're hoping that because so often that Black women are angry and Black men are aggressive. They're intentional about changing that. Absolutely having self-confidence, appreciate your ethnicity, understand, feeling comfortable with the melanin and the curl, really emphasizing that part as well.
Question about that. Would love to go down. Brandon, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go a little deeper in this, Emily. I think you just mentioned, I'm going to stalk a little bit and say about your son's at Panther, right? It's exactly what you just, for so many people who don't understand of a movie and a movie as a Black boy in America, right? A hero figure, and then you see one fine. I just maybe lean in about kind of representation and hide or Black situation and not look as a negative sense of, oh, you're tipping a lot of pride over understanding where you come from means, and then again, building that what's going on. I would just love to hear children as well too in that conversation. You took up 2 young sons, but do that and what are the tips or ideas that you have in terms of, because that to me is really about how do you for students who again who may not be dominantly white spaces, but important a critical math idea, but just love to hear your thought in building that because I know too.
Yeah, so many ways to thinking from the trauma and informed lens. Dr. Who was raised as a dog, and he worked on trauma, and one of his that really rates kids who do well is having that one who just 100% related to them, believes who they are. As a school, it is hard to find just unconditionally accept, always be your cheerleader, and representation exists, or who is a person of color, have that support, and to have that one adult who believes your chances of success. Where most of the adults, then it makes it self in a different place. Their phrase, you can't be. And, I don't know if that's true. I remember, my son and be different character, tell my 4-year-old, well, you can't be super, but you can be, you have to tell them, you can be whatever, have to be limited by on TV, or that Santa Claus is black. But, and it's like, what Santa Claus sons ask me, like, well, mommy is, and because again, what is very different and what their experience is, having that individual or having that adult in there and believes in them, difference in their success. And imagining what my husband owns his own business, year-old told me can have a business because daddy simply, seeing gives him idea not have. I don't family. And I remember I struggled in classes that I needed to really think about and because I struggled, was not really willing to give me, she sat me to the side in career. I don't think that matters. I think you should go for something that's easy to disappoint yourself by. And fortunately for people outside of her who told me like there are you, even though I didn't have a family was like, you're going to be a doctor. And so that there for me, but if I didn't have behind me, that conversation broken me.
They gave hope.
Oh yeah.
And when you mentioned Bruce, there's a great TED talk by Andrade, Eric, and kind of like he runs the Roses in Bay Area. It's worth mentioning this like Brene Brown's language, like true belonging. So it means huge, some sort of innate need to whatever, something, some community need can be that often it leads to confusion. You're not talking about fitting. You're talking about true belonging doesn't true belonging require, and then be for that kind of authentic, really important distinguishment. I think.
Right there. And that's about terminology. That's the difference. Diversity is color or having, a certain color in your organization, have a voice and to resources than having a say. And it's very different, not prepared to manage. Try to recruit a whole bunch of diversity, a toxic environment. And because they're not at that for inclusion.
There's that third level about equity, and you mind of how that tremendous effect, obviously, what's going on. That next step in terms of, again, on the diversity step one in a way, but what's that next, and when you talk to, you're talking on the road as well too, what's that not just being, but what does it really look like when?
So if we think about like diversity, Brandon, the next step. So diversity, for example, Muslim students to your school. Maybe, putting on the Ramadan is on this would mean celebrate and giving those students time off that you give students, or support religious holidays for, or and so that they're not penalized for that. And so when we're equity versus equality, the same thing. Everybody same thing, regardless of their needs, individuate. So we look at their background, we look at this, and their experience successful and thrive. So we don't want children. We want them to be successful at something. We just what that skill is, or they will be great at math or not English, but they made, auto mechanics, or they made, what is that strength and how strength or that skill set they can be successful in other who they need to be. So, again, kids 2 hours away to, when they get home, this video or read this assignment on the internet, because they may have one computer at home to do work, a parent. And so even in environment, can everybody be successful? One set of rules or this one nations. If our goal is that only certain people, the model that we have, that everyone be successful.
In general, systems in general, but educate up in a complete, it's here is this timeline. Forget race, age, personality, maturity, like all these sort of in this huge degree of speaking, we're kind of like, yep, here, right? To varying degree, right?
Right. Everything that's standardized testing, lived experiences, standardized testing. You have to have, and we know that intelligence or ability on it, as excluding so many other are better can be successful, or if they can learn. Standard is so that certain certain to be excluded. That's how the entire.
Yeah, the conversation is always start line. Like it's the race in the middle. That's the point. Like you can change. We're not say that, to your point, it's to be this, and this. But by saying like bring everybody to the table, idea to your point, Nicole, institutions. What are we doing as adults to we're not answer and fix these things, but the structures that started them to be able to meet the needs. Occasionally for so long is fucking in that sense that we talk about meeting And that's not, it's really meeting kids where they are, meeting them where they need, and then taking them if I don't know where they are. And I think one point that you bring up, in terms of timing, I'd love to maybe, and again, I just would love to, what's the fix to this?
Like, what are we doing? Because I this time next year, Lives Matter, like it won't be, what's the thing to do? Like I also do talks because nobody, now it's important, else will become the spotlight. Have to do is keep this at the forefront to continue to be a priority. I'm working with organizations, put a 1-year D&I, 5-year D&I plan. Like it didn't happen overnight. And there's a lot of needs to be addressed. And so it is just creating a longitude, you're in it forever. And that the goal, up a list of priorities, it's right, not going to lose sight of that. Taking a perspective and from the top, systemic or, institutional level. So our candidates who support investing in businesses, students of color or racial equity, and, what are we invested in? What are for our town, even outside of our school experiences within this area? A conversation about that, and they're walking to school. Do they feel like by police before they even multiple episodes of racism, the trains in the community? So not only within, so also a part of a larger community in equity and changing things. Do we have that we're connected to that in a committee or the making these decisions? Again, because racism, we can do all the individual to make no difference if this is burdening us with oppression change. We have to look at system, city, state, making sure that we're using to affect change, the existing students and to come. That leadership is full. I've been in organizations or work with organizations. The president or the senior director is not involved because for me, it's performative. We have this one person and nobody else. You're going to burn, they will leave and everything will start. And so if leadership and attending these meetings, people of color doing the work, if they're two allies doing the work, they need to understand in their school with the students. And then I think making sure that you really, whether it's focus group, survey, I know what people need. When leaders make assumptions, having the actual feedback, that's when they make mistakes, a real need. And so, I've done a series of surveys or focus detail. And to also, if you have a conclusion, students need to be representation. So immigrant LGBTQ students, like they have a voice and should feel represent the table. So it's not just the leaders, but it's also encouraging students' effort. So if they're happening day to day, can you as students do? How do we use to become future leaders, to impact change and in their community and with leadership, with involve students in that where the change needs to happen? It's different. So it really is of the individual, the leadership, much larger institutions.
Leadership person being a and believes and is heavily in, and James, Brandon, you can speak to this more than place to kind of say like, okay, and we're gonna write going forward.
To echo your point, we can't affect the difference in the standpoint of your statement about, I think that for so long these institutions being not immune at all to this, and they weren't built by us for those people of color. So why, I think to me, that's where the next point is different. And it pains, I think we saw from the Black man law across the country, implement these stories were or what your situation was that count at any private school across the country. That's the stemming. So defeating all hope, and that's where that comes from. This idea is that it's a lack of hope. It's why am I different? So think about that, and I hope our community can see differently. This is still part of it. So step in our direction, and I think we go, and not just because of our uncertain future, what we deal with, but I do when I look at our kids. So why we get up and do what we do, the ones that are going to change that. But I more to say like, oh, just wait, knowing that to your means so much to kids of color that I think for so long we keep saying that's not enough, because they're like your two boys are dealing with this daily, as we're seeing now again. So yeah, I say all to say that so many of those pieces as well.
We'll wrap it up here. Will you can find you online and on? My
website is well.com and those are DRCB, both Instagram and Twitter.
We'll put all of that in the show notes also. Again, really appreciate the time. We were all really excited. Didn't really appreciate it. Like I said, we've been, it means.
I'm glad that the conversation.
Our show is an independent preschool rethinking education that we can, in fact, come on and join us.